Right, joining us now, one of the faces of Sky Sports Rugby League coverage. The only face that matters because he's on this podcast right now. Exactly. Our favourite half of Baz and Tez, because Tez hasn't come on yet. It's Barrie McDermott. Barrie, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm really well. I'm really, you know, we talk about glass half full or half empty. My glass is overflowing this week because, you know, we probably 12 months ago, a great friend of ours was sadly given some horrific news, and we all sat around a table, said what we'd like to do, said what would, you know, be the best thing for of course I'm talking about Rob Burrow, for Rob to have, you know, at the front of his mind. And you know, thanks to the man that is Kevin Sinfield, the country's talking about Rob, you know, I think the world, I think people all over the certainly the rugby league fraternity are talking about Kev and what he's done. And you know, I've been asked 100 times, if not 1,000 times, you know, how's he done it? And I don't know any of my mates. You know, I'm talking about all of us that were sat around that table saying we want to raise this money, you know, give Rob a whole load of peace of mind. I don't know any of them that could have done it. So having been there for 2 or 3 of the days, just seeing what he's put himself through, I'm just so proud of him and so proud of what he's done for our pal.
I think he gave you a bit of stick, didn't he? You joined him on one of the days and gave you some stick.
As I say, yeah, your singing got him through.
Well, I think he missed the W out on one of the descriptions he gave. Yeah, yeah. You know, the rule of 6 has played a major part. People who are listening to this, who are aware of the 7-in-7 marathon story, which I don't suppose anybody hasn't heard of it now, but just in case they do, just in case they don't, sorry, and they haven't heard of it, it's Kevin Sinfield, 7 marathons in 7 days, all under. Well, he went for 4 hours, and he was virtually under 350, if not for all of them. So it was a humongous challenge. But the rule of 6 meant that, you know, certainly people like Jamie Jones Buchanan, Jamie Peacock, myself, we had to interchange. We had to sort of fill a guest spot that changed the face, changed the voice, changed the banter that was keeping him going. So yeah, I was on day 4, where he said was by far his worst day. And those are you that kept tabs on it, and those that will go out and watch the brilliant documentary that Jones's media business has put together will see it was the snowy day. And yeah, it's what we have all the time up in Saddleworth. We're used to it, but running for 3.5, 3:40 or whatever it was, he said that was his toughest day, emotionally, physically, just a little bit drained. And yeah, it's an amazing thing, and I'm proud to be part of it as well.
Saddle sore at all?
Yes, bruises. Bruises in places I didn't know would get bruises. And I'm a typical rugby like me, Phil. You know me quite well. I've got to the point where I'm you know, I'm due to ride, which was Thursday night, and thought, right, well, I'll have to start getting on the phone to my mates, see if I can lend a bike. Came home with one. Any of the people of a certain age that will remember that yellow page he's had will remember the dad talking about the saddle being like a razor blade. Well, I had that conversation with myself when I had my first bike, and then I managed to borrow one of my daughter's boyfriend, which was a brilliant bike, $3,000 worth of mountain bike. But sadly, no, that didn't lessen the pain. My rear end is still glowing, but as the saying goes, it's all worth it.
I mean, the answer is probably within that programme you presented on Sky before the grand final. But what is it about Rob Burrow that makes him such a special character?
It's an interesting question, that, Rich, because you do think about it, you do mull it over, and as men, right? I'm not ashamed to be a man. I'm not ashamed to be a masculine, you know, old values, old-fashioned. I'm not afraid, but I don't like crying. I don't like getting teary. I don't feel like I have an outburst and a weep and I feel better. I'm not one of them. I don't like it. I like a lot of people I know, I fight against it. But when you do start to think about Rob and the impact on the game, first of all, you think about the impact on the game, and I'm not old enough, or perhaps wasn't taking enough notice of the era when Roger Millward was around, but it's reminiscent of Roger and his impact on the game. Small, diminutive, quick, smart, intelligent, and made bloody fools out of all the big fellas that wanted to get hold of him and give him a whack. But as a bloke, just a lovely, lovely man. And I have to be careful how I say this. There are people who've been in this game, and you know, they make enemies. I probably put myself in that camp. Make enemies, and if things happen, you know, well, you shrug your shoulders and say, you know, he danced with the devil and all that stuff. I'm not talking about this specific illness. I'm just talking about life in general. But I don't know anybody that's got a bad word for Rob. So what makes him special? He's a lovely lad. He would do anything for anybody. That's the phrase that he keeps saying, and that's something all of us planted in his brain when we started talking about this game. You know, cast your mind back to, I think it would be January, would it? We all sat round the table, talked about getting the legends back out. I was loosely invited for what would have been a minute and a half cameo, but I just had one of my shoulders done and I couldn't do it. And I said, look, I can't play in this game, but what I can do is I can start the people that I know having conversations about, you know, possibly filming it. I didn't for 1 minute think we'd get it on Sky. I didn't for 1 minute think that it would be another impactful viewing experience where everybody's just bought into, first of all, Rob and the plight of his family, and then this horrible disease of MND.
Your relationship, though, is slightly different, because for Rob to be the joker that he is, there has to be a victim. And I think the one thing we have learned from obviously the work that you do, the films that have been made, that was you a lot of the time. And yet you're still as close to him.
Yeah, I think he honed his skills on me. And then he perfected them when Kylie came. So listen, I've never been afraid to have a giggle at myself. I don't take myself too seriously. I take the things I do very seriously. That's why I dedicate my life to our great passion of rugby league and sport, and in a lesser way to giving back. I know when you listen to Jonesy talks about paying it forward. I very much have that philosophy, but I have a different way of looking at it. I had so many black marks against my name, both as a player and as a drunken individual around the nightclubs of Oldham, that I have a lot of things to make up for. But in regards to Rob and his sense of humour, I always found him funny. So even when I was at the butt of them jokes, I just found it funny. So I think I've got a bit of a warped, twisted sense of humour, and we both shared that. But he has a way, Rob, of making you feel like you're the bully, even though you're the butt of the joke.
You're involved in the horse racing project, Burrow Seven. How excited have you been about that, and how many people have been involved with it so far?
Thousands have got involved. It's been terrific. Something I didn't know an awful lot about horse racing, but a business colleague of mine. So my working week is dedicated towards Sky. My whole life is revolved around rugby league, and then in the time that I'm not doing stuff like that, and I think this is born out of when I was a part-time player and working during the day. I've always done other things, and sometimes it was coaching, other times it was going in school, and a lot of the time it was working life. And a colleague of mine who's a Wigan rugby fan floated an idea about a racing club and sent some stuff through to me, and I sort of looked at it and said, I'm not into horse racing, so I don't see how it's going to work. At the end of last year, we started having some conversations about Rob. The beginning of this year, we started putting some things together, and then, of course, the world shut down. So then you start thinking, well, do you know what? We can't do dinners, we can't do rugby matches, we can't do all these things that would normally be our go-to fundraising projects. So I just started looking at it more and more and more, and Phil Hawthorne and his company, Racing for Business, have done it before. They showed me the stuff that they'd done, and I just started to buy into it a little bit more. But ultimately, it was forced upon us because we couldn't go anywhere. So more and more and more, I was sat in front of my computer thinking, right, well, let's have a little look now. And I met some people who talked about what it would mean for the horse to be a good horse, because you don't want to buy one off the beach on Blackpool, because sadly I might be one of them in a race. And then by the time we'd got all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, we were into jump season. So we came across what is now Burrow Seven, with excellent pedigree. The hope is he will race at Cheltenham because his pedigree is that good. And then once everybody started to understand, and I have to say, I don't think a lot of people understood it. They just went, there's me 59 quid. I'm in. I love rugby league. I love horse racing. I love Rob Burrow. So I'm in. So a lot of it is retrospective explanations of what we're doing and what we're trying to do. But this racing club will be, hopefully, they're a little bit like Jamie Peacock jumping horses. They can play till they're 12 years old. They have to be 4 to jump. So in theory, there's a lot of years where people will buy in again to the racing club, and it's a recurring revenue to Rob's Fight Back Fund. And again, just peeling back a few of the layers of what we're doing and how we're doing it, we very quickly got to a point where the target we'd set ourselves with Rob was reached, because he's a lovely lad, and people have jumped on board with what we're trying to do. So then with the other money raised, Rob's very, very adamant. He wants to help everybody. He wants to help more people. There was a lovely line on that documentary last night where Kevin said it perfectly. We've reached our target now, and we can start to help some more people who couldn't normally get it.
In terms of how this has come about so quickly, we shouldn't be surprised that the rugby league community got behind it from the minute it became a cause. But in a year, it's almost taken on a life of its own. How do we best capitalise on this? Because I think you just hinted at it there, that yes, some of it's awareness, some of it's actual money for either research or looking after people. But I think one of the most heartening things was seeing the BBC, when they set Kevin off on his final marathon, having other MND sufferers and families sending their best wishes and saying how important it was. Obviously, the MNDA is linked to the Rhinos Foundation, so there's going to be more projects rolled out, I think, in the future. We can't let this trail really go cold, can we? No, and it's an interesting question, isn't it? How do you? Because I heard somebody say, I read it in one of the papers, one of the articles that's been written about the marathons, this disease isn't incurable. They've just not done enough research. And what we've learned, and I'm stealing another line off Kevin here, is what we've learned over the last sort of 10 months is we can cure anything. If we put our minds to it, science, industry, everything that's all rallied together to find this vaccine for COVID-19, if we want to, we can find those cures. So I think we've just got to stick with it. I've had so many people that have come up to me and said, oh, will you please thank Kevin? My brother, my uncle, my sister, and it's not just exclusively young men. It's not just exclusively older people. It's anybody and everybody. There's a mate of mine that lives in Young in New South Wales, just outside Canberra, about an hour away from Canberra, and that little town in Young is riddled with MND, and they don't know why. And it's part genetic, circumstances that cause you to produce this protein that then damages all the things that go to fixing the ailments that we've got in our body. So we've just got to keep asking the questions. We've got to keep raising the money. We've got to keep talking about it, and we've got to do everything we can. And that philosophy of getting out there, and we've seen on Monday now. Then I'm all lost with my days. On Monday, when we finished, of course, Kevin's doing what he's doing. He must have done 1,000 interviews, and I was stood at the back, just watching, thinking how special it was for him to get that praise and that
accolade and rightly be able to then stand up, as he does better than anybody else in our game, and articulate it really well and talk about Rob MND in words that just bring everybody in. And there was a lady that come to me and she said, I think it's fantastic what you've done. I think it's amazing. I think, you know, it's made me think about what I can do, and it's made me think about what I can give. And maybe the day after, she's gone on social media and said, I've been inspired by 7 in 7. I'm going to do my own set of challenges over the next week. And then very shortly after that, I'm not sure whether it was Leeds or the RFL that released a little link to say, if you want to do something, if you decide that you want to do 7 in 7, this is where you can donate your money, and we'll support you all we can.
So the amazing generosity of people. We're obviously living in, as you say, these weird times where a lot of people have been out of work, a lot of people have been laid off, but still, you know, to raise £2.5 million in a week is just shows the ridiculous generosity of people who have been touched by Rob's story.
Yeah. So my week was Friday, where we got over 77. So then, not being able to run at weekend, my phone hasn't been out of my hand. So I've been emailing people, texting people. I'm on a load of ex-players WhatsApp groups. Get some content out there. Talk about Rob. Talk about Kev. Let's see if we can get to 777. Which again, I was with him when that ticked over 777. It was more or less when we set off on that last day. I was with him when it went over 1 million. Having spoke to him over the last couple of days or so, it just keeps going and going and going. And it is because of Kev, it is because of Rob, and it is because of MND. And those three things are making people chuck that tenner in, chuck that 20 quid in, whatever it is. And it's great, and it's something to celebrate. It's also very sad. It's also, I wish we wasn't doing it. I wish we wasn't having to get together. And those of us that get involved in the charity things are doing it because we want to do something good, not because, you know, one of our pals is sadly in need of our support.
So what is it about the air in Oldham? Because this was fashioned in Oldham. It was Oldham people that carried it along. There is something about you guys that is just a little bit special.
We live on a mountain, Phil. We live on a mountain, and it's always raining. It wasn't all supposed to be in Oldham. There were different venues, and it was like a bit of a roadshow plan because, again, of COVID. And Andy Burnham was quite good. The people over the other side, over in Leeds, were quite good. But everywhere else, it was all just a little bit too complicated with no automatic connection. And not for 1 minute saying they didn't care, but Kev's from Oldham, and Rob and Kev are both synonymous with Leeds. So those two places fit. But to answer the question, I don't know, Phil. We're like a lot of northern working class towns, and especially when you look at places, I'm going to pick somewhere random like Barrow. Barrow had 2 players in the grand final, didn't they? They had Brad Singleton on Wigan, and they had Morgan Knowles playing for St Helens. These towns that aren't and don't have a Super League presence are still managing to churn out, produce talent. They still manage to cultivate the right minerals. It's part nature and it's part nurture, like everything in life. You're born big. You like your food. You're a little bit twisted, so we'll steer you in the direction of rugby. And then if we get a couple of good role models around you, a couple of mentors, maybe you can carve a career out in this great sport of ours. But we're always proud to be from Oldham, and I haven't done it for a while, but for a long time, when a young pro used to sign for an Oldham club, I used to actively find them, seek them out, sit down with them and say, don't undervalue yourself. Don't think that when you go to Wigan or Saints or Leeds or Warrington, wherever it is, don't think that you're sitting round a table, people are looking down on you, because we're built differently. It's harsh, it's cold, it's wet. Typically we play for teams that have got 5 good rugby players and everybody else is probably just too fat for football. And they'll have a go, but, they just enjoy the beginning bit and the after bit a lot more than they're getting muddy and bloody. So we don't necessarily focus on the scoreboard. That doesn't mean we don't like winning. We're not beaten until we give up. So that kind of philosophy, I think, runs through the town. You got Mark Sneed to name, but just one who comes to mind, who turns up in a big game and just shines like a bright beacon. So we have. If I thought about it, I could name 2 or 3 in every first team squad, and then 2 or 3 again in the academy setup that want a go at professional rugby league.
We need to talk about that grand final in a bit, but just a story from Rugby Union this week, which is concerning Steve Thompson, World Cup winner with England, quoted this week. He can't remember playing any of those games. It's frightening from the 2003 World Cup. There's obviously an issue with head injuries. It's been talked about a lot. We talk about player welfare. There's court cases in America. Now this court case in Rugby Union. Is it something that concerns you in your future and the future of those you played around?
Well, Phil and I had a very heated debate, didn't we? Maybe a week ago. Steve Thompson, who I got to spend a bit of time with when he came to Carnegie, a big man, big boisterous man. It's sad. It's sad what happens to some people. It is sad that there are people, and I'm thinking about Leeds Rhinos and somebody that's involved in their squad now that's struggling to get rid of the headaches, the migraines, the legacy of too many bangs on the head. It will happen. It is going to happen. There's 2 ways of looking at it. The first way is you've got to be prepared. As a game, the club and the game as a governing body need to prepare for that first one that says, I'm not well, and it's because I played that game, and it's because this doctor, that physio, that coach made decisions on my future that have cost me my, I'm thinking of Alex Popperwell as well, the Welsh Rugby Union lad. He's got early onset Alzheimer's, is it, or dementia, one of them. And these things will happen. But as Phil and I spoke about, if you get blokes in a room on their own and say, there's your contract, you sign that, but there's also a little caveat at the bottom that says, if there is complications from that, you accept your own responsibility. I think 99.9% of the people that have played the game would do that. And I'm all for player welfare. I'm all for the aftercare and the protection of players and their future, but I don't think you can do that in the game that we play. And it's very sad and it's unfortunate, but if we keep making things safe and as safe can be, then very soon we'll be playing touch and pass.
I think one of the really interesting things I came away from our debate was that you're actually in a unique position to talk about how the game's changed, and then clearly the impact that may have had on the medical side of things, because you started off part-time and in the winter and moved into the professional era going full-time, and then obviously the training that you did changed. The collisions in training, I would imagine, in the wrestling room were on a par with some of the ones you would have had in a game in your early days.
Yeah.
Is that where the sport has to come in and look at rules and head injury protocols? Because it's not so much just that it's your responsibility for yourself, and I don't think anybody would ever argue that. Is it that because the sport itself has changed, the sport also needs to look at itself and make sure that you're safe playing it?
I've often described rugby league, so people will say, right, how do you get yourself in that mental place, but also that physical place where you're running into a collision that's the equivalent of the car crash? And I've often described it as the bloke that's on TV on the Guinness Book of World Records show, and he chops a big block of ice or a big block of concrete or something equally as tough and as difficult to do. He hasn't just walked in off the street. He's had to prepare his body and get it into a certain state. Your hardened bones, obviously your muscles and everything else, you get them into a place through repetition. Coaches will talk about repetition. I haven't had enough reps with my players on the field, and I've heard it a lot during this time where they've hardly had any time to play. They've played, they're recovering, and then they're getting ready to play again. So coaches will say, I haven't had enough reps with my players, but that goes for not just getting ready to play certain teams under certain conditions. It goes for your body as well. I'm pleased that we've waited until March. I would like to have seen it into April before we start this next year. Not for COVID, for operations, for recovery, for rehab. And then once you've got rid of the damage that you've done this year, to then get your body into that right physical state for next year. There's an article that's been written this week on rugby union, and maybe the governing body having a control over how much contact work is done, what level of contact work is done, to maybe pull back and as a game, as a union, whatever it is that makes the decision, people say, no, you're not doing that. We're not allowing you to do that. My fear is that the consequence of that will be that when it comes time to run into that collision, that you've not hardened the bones, you've not prepared yourself physically and mentally to take that impact. Now, when we were discussing this last week, I said something to you that, you know, during my career, I've had 26 operations. 26 times I've gone on the operating table to repair something. It would be start your season, finish your season, play internationals, get your operations, start your season. That's how the cycle went for however many years. Recently, I had a new shoulder, the same replacement joint that some players have at hips, knees. I had to have a shoulder one. But I can remember going all the way back to, I think it was 1999, when I started to have painkilling injections in my shoulder. The doctor saying, you know, this isn't a fix it, this is a putting it off until you can fix it. But I, Phil, needed to pay my mortgage. I needed to make sure that I could get selected for the team. And if I didn't get selected for the team, then I couldn't pay my mortgage, then I wouldn't get a contract, and then I'd be out of a job. So how you then get that balance of, you're not allowed to make those decisions, but by the way, when you don't get a new contract because you've only played 11 games this year, I just don't know how you do that, because it is a ruthless sport with only a very limited amount of money, that they can't be emotional about these things with players. There's a player, well, I'll say it, there's Ben Flower at Wigan there. Ben Flower's done 9 years. He's given great service to Wigan. They haven't got a reason to give him that 10th year, which would allow him, and I'm putting myself in his position now, would allow him to have a testimonial, to give himself a good chunk of money to set on the next part of his journey. Because part of the reason players play too long, it might well have something to do with the changing room. It might have something to do with the adrenaline and the roar of the crowd and all that nonsense. But most of it is, as working class lads, as lads who are not particularly academic, let's put it that way, there's a calm way of putting it, we're kinesthetic. We haven't got anything else. So when we finish as a rugby league player, a lot of lads are saying, well, I'll get I get a qualification as a plumber or as a bricklayer, or I'll deliver goods, or I'll do that. Because as a game, sometimes we don't work on them to make them understand what a skill set they've got, what they can offer a working environment. You know, the things that make them exceptional rugby players in the working environment, in whatever industry they go in, they would, as soon as they know what they're doing, they would excel in that environment.
There's a couple of things that I wanted to pick up on. I know that these are subjects that we could talk all afternoon about, but one is transition, because the Barrie McDermott who started out playing rugby league at the Watershed Inns and then terrorised the Aussies is not the Barrie McDermott you would think would now be a consummate television presenter who's involved in the world of finance, who has pulled together a racehorse syndicate. Can you look back and say, you know, transition is something that we need to do more of? But you're a fantastic example of how rugby players can do it outside of the game.
I had some wonderful mentors. I had some people that spent time with me. I could give you a list of them now, but right from the age of 18, people who sat down with me and said, you need to do more of that and less of that as a rugby player, were probably the same people that started to say, invest your time and invest your energy into things that will excel your post career. So 18-year-old Barrie McDermott, I wanted a big house, I wanted a nice car, and I didn't want to work. Well, that's not a reality, is it? You're not going to get those things unless you put the hard work in. I do get disappointed when I still hear some of the players that are playing now say that they start work at 7. I'm doing that thing with my fingers. They start work at 7. They finish for 1, and then they're getting ready as a full-time rugby player. They're getting ready to do the next day's training. They're focusing on the diet and the nutrition, and it's a contradiction, because people who bring you into the clubs will bring you into their environment and say, we want you to be so dedicated, so tunnel vision, single-minded, that's all you think about. But I was given advice of some brilliant mentors that said, you can do that, but you can also look at what the next step is going to be for you as an individual and think, you've got 2 or 3 hours to play with that. I worked on the building sites before I went to Wigan, which was my first full-time experience as an Oldham player and as a young adult before I was a professional player. I was a builder. I was on the building sites of the Northwest, going up and down the M56, M62, trying to earn a couple of quid. But I also got a strong work ethic from both those days and the people around me that I grew up with. My mum and dad have been the best role models and the best mentors that I could have ever had, because it's get out, get to work, bring home some money. And maybe just touching on the last topic we discussed, which was the injuries and all that, my attitude to injuries was probably the same thing that made me successful in the working environment. Is I might have a cold and I might not feel it, I might not be tired, but I've got to get out there because I've got a family to provide for and I've got a future to secure. So if we are serious about player welfare, and it means different things to different people. So player welfare, one of the aspects of player welfare is how you invest your money. You only need a certain amount of money, so what you do in the rest of it. Part of it is personal development. How are you improving yourself to make sure that transition that will happen, there's not a might about it, it's going to happen. You just need to be as ready as you can be. So when that decision needs to be made, you're in a good place to make it. We talked about Kevin Sinfield right at the beginning. I only know Kev. He's the only man that I know that has a piece of paper in terms of a qualification. I think he got an honours in the end, didn't he? Is he? You'll tell me what he got.
Sports Business Administration. He got an MA.
MA, that's it. I knew it was in sports business. But he's got that piece of paper. But alongside his playing career, he was doing both. He's the only bloke I know that when he was dislocating fingers, having knee injuries, shoulder injuries, whatever it is, didn't say, do you know what? I've had enough of breaking my body. I'm going to do that because that's a lot easier than this. So if players have the right plan for the transition, and player welfare managers is a really good step forward. I did a little bit of that in my time at the Rhinos. That's a great step forward, but it's not enough. We need to get some backing. We need to get some finances. Most of all, we need to pierce the conscience of the player to say, you've done 4 hours, you've got another 4 hours that you can use and utilise to set yourself up for the future.
I should probably spend my time better. Go on, Phil. You can because we're running out of time, and I've got all the frivolous questions.
One other thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I know it was very important to you, and I'm not sure we've ever capitalised on it. Playing for Ireland meant everything to you. And when you look at that quarter-final in the World Cup in 2000, arguably the best game of that entire tournament, why is it that, so far on, almost, 20-odd years later, Ireland isn't a powerhouse in rugby league?
I genuinely think if we put some effort and we sent some people out to watch, I'm talking about domestic Irish rugby union players here. I'm talking about domestic Welsh rugby union players and Scotland in that case as well. You think back to when I was watching the game and I was lucky enough to play with Jonathan Davis, but we had such powerful names that have converted from Welsh rugby union, probably because the Welsh rugby union lads are working class and they've come from that environment. We connected with them on the right level. The English rugby union players, not so much there, that private school. Ireland, there's probably a little bit of both. But if we went away and we looked at players who are 21, 22 years of age, I'm not being generic here, but if you take 6 foot, 15 and a half, 16 stone with decent ball handling skills, we could make them and convert them into a Brian Carney. Brian Carney was as raw as they come. Brian will argue that he wasn't much better at the end of his career than he was at the start, but he was a real success story of what we can do with a player that suits our game. So I loved playing for Ireland. My family would always be proud, but the biggest story for me was always about spreading the game. I love the game. I owe the game everything. I owe the game everything because it's taught me everything, good, bad, everything in between. If you behave like an idiot, you'll get flicked. If you do the right things more often than not, on the pitch, off the pitch, training and in general as a human being, you'll get what you deserve as well. What we aren't doing is we aren't looking outside our own little parameters. We've got blinkers on. You know, we've got other clubs in the Northwest that aren't as strong in the amateur game. Instead of strengthening their amateur game and then likewise going and looking into Cheshire and around that rugby union hotbed, they're going looking at Wigan's best or Wigan's surplus best players, if that makes sense. So Wigan have got 30 players every year that turn 16 at the same time that are capable of playing at a professional level. Some teams would rather go and get the 11th or 12th or 13th best player in Wigan than do a little bit of work in their locality and then spread the wing and just think outside the box a little bit. I give Fitzy his credit at Warrington. Done a lot of work on youth development during his time and a little bit before him. But they're looking at those union converts. I mean, Luther Burrell didn't work out. If you'd have got Luther Burrell at 23, 24, might well have worked out. And he's always looking about how he can improve what he's doing in recruitment and in retention.
Bang out of time, as ever. The minute is counting down on the screen. Sum up the grand final in 10 seconds, Barry.
Absolutely unbelievable and a privilege to be there. I couldn't speak highly enough about the grand final, the players within it, the stories, the narratives, everything is there. I don't understand and I don't know why we're not still talking about it all day, every day. Probably because we're talking about marathon runners. Yeah,
we had too much to talk about. That's the problem. That's it. You know, if we had more time, we'd talk more about the grand final. Barry, it's been a pleasure. We'll get you on again if you're willing to do so.
Of course.
But thank you very much for your time. I'll stick all the links out about everything, and we'll hopefully see you in person in 2021 at some point.
Thank you, gents. I'll see you soon. I'll definitely be on again.